Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to this webinar, which is being hosted by ICCT and ETAuto. The topic of today's discussion is National Programs for Electrification of Transport, a Tale of Two Geographies. We will be diving deep into two geographies, as the name of the webinar suggests. One is India, and second is the United States of America. We will be hearing from two experts. From the India side, a little more about the FAME scheme, the FAME 2 scheme, which just got concluded. And then we will be hearing a little bit of an interesting insight on the US's Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, as it is famously called. And we have a esteemed set of speakers who will be with us for next 90 odd minutes. And before we start, let me just quickly introduce the speakers for the session, starting with Sumati Kohli. She's the Associate Researcher at the International Council on Clean Transport, and she'll be providing some insights on the FAME 2 scheme. We have Dr. Aditya Ramji, who is the Director of Global South Clean Transport Center at UC Davis. We have Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma, Consultant Niti Aayog for Electric Mobility. We have Mansha Sehgal joining us from the World Bank, where she is a transport specialist. And then we also have Mr. Vinkesh Gulati, Vice President, Automotive Skill Development Council. So as you can see, we have quite an expert group of people who will be talking with us over the next 90 odd minutes. My name is Amit Bhatt. I'm the Managing Director for ICCT in India, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So let's kick start the conversation. I'll first request Sumati to make a brief presentation on FAME 2, and then we can kickstart the conversation point today. Over to you, Sumati.
Thanks, Amit. So I'll just go ahead and share the presentation. Hello, everyone, and good evening. So today I'll be talking about the second phase of India's flagship EV promotion policy, which is the FAME 2 scheme, which recently concluded in March 2024. And for today's session, we'll be diving into the demand incentives component under the scheme. And we'll be going a step further to develop certain policy considerations for the potential next phase of the scheme. So to begin with, the study that we have recently undertaken at ICCT, it essentially has three aspects to it. The first one is where we dive deep into certain insights into the FAME 2 scheme, such as we examine the fund utilization under the scheme, we examine the vehicle targets that were set, and to what extent these vehicle targets were achieved under the scheme. We go ahead and then undertake an analysis of the demand incentives that were offered to the various vehicle segments under the scheme, and we examine the extent to which these demand incentives were able to bring about cost parity with the EVs and the conventional vehicles. And through this analysis, we develop certain policy considerations for the potential next phase of the scheme. So to begin with a quick introduction, the FAME 2 scheme was launched in April 2019 with an initial funding of rupees 10,000 crores. And the duration of the scheme was set for 3 years. However, in 2021, the scheme's duration was extended by 2 years, bringing the entire scheme duration to 5 years. And during this time, the scheme's funding was kept unchanged. Very recently, in February 2024, the funding was enhanced to rupees 11,500 crores. And as you can see from this graph here, it essentially represents the percentage of funding out of this 11,500 crores, which was utilized in each of the fiscal years during which the scheme was in force. In totality, at the end of the scheme, about 69% of the funding under the scheme was utilized and 31% of the funding remained unutilized. Now, talking about the vehicle incentivization targets, which were set under the scheme, there were essentially 4 vehicle segments which were incentivized. two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers, and buses. So initially, when the scheme was first launched, the targets that were set were 10 lakh vehicles for two-wheelers, 5 lakh vehicles for three-wheelers, 55,000 vehicles for four-wheelers, and about 7,000 buses. Later on, these targets were then revised, and these targets stood at about 15 lakh 50,000 vehicles for the two-wheeler segment, about 1 lakh 55,000 for the three-wheeler segment, about 30,000 for the four-wheelers, and about 7,200 electric buses. Now, talking about the extent to which these vehicle incentivization targets were achieved. For two-wheelers, 75% of the revised target was achieved. For three-wheelers, the target achievement was 84%. For the four-wheeler segment, 55% of the target was achieved, and for buses, the target achievement stood at 66%. And on a cumulative basis, taking all the segments into account, in totality, 76% of the number of vehicles which were targeted were eventually incentivized under the scheme. Now I'll quickly dive into the next aspect of the study, wherein we undertake an analysis of the demand incentives which were offered to the various vehicle segments under the scheme. And through this analysis, we also develop certain policy considerations for the potential next phase of the scheme. And I'll be beginning with the two-wheeler segment first. So for the two-wheeler segment analysis, we undertake an assessment of the last two subsidy levels which were offered to the two-wheeler segment. So these two subsidy levels that we have analyzed here are rupees 10,000 per kilowatt hour, capped at 15% of the ex-factory price, and the other subsidy scenario that we're analyzing is 15,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, capped at 40% of the ex-showroom price. Now, first, we undertake a upfront cost analysis here. And what we find is that in the absence of subsidies, the electric two-wheeler is about twice that of the conventional two-wheeler on an upfront cost basis. In a scenario where we have a subsidy of about 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, about 27% of the cost gap between the conventional two-wheeler and the electric two-wheeler is bridged. However, if the subsidy level is higher at 15,000 rupees, the cost gap which is bridged stands at about 60%. Going forward, we have also undertaken a TCO parity analysis as part of this paper. Although we have not represented it here, but TCO parity has already been achieved for the electric two-wheelers, and electric two-wheelers are already cheaper than their conventional counterparts. Having said that, it is important to recognize that the Indian two-wheeler consumer is highly price sensitive, and they give significant importance to the upfront costs. And if the uptake of electric two-wheelers is to be accelerated in the market, then subsidies could be extended further for this vehicle segment under the potential next phase of the scheme. We also went ahead and undertook an upfront cost parity analysis on the basis of the timeline, which is essentially that under these various subsidy scenarios, when do we expect the upfront cost parity to be achieved? So the second graph here on the right side, we can see that under a scenario of no incentives, upfront cost parity for electric two-wheelers is expected to be achieved sometime after 2035. In a scenario where we have incentives of 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, the upfront cost parity could be achieved as early as 2030. However, if the subsidy levels are higher at 15,000 rupees, the upfront cost parity could be achieved sometime around 2027 as well. So pulling all these analysis together, for accelerating the uptake of electric two-wheelers in the market, incentives could be offered till 2025, 2027 timeframe, wherein the incentive levels could be kept higher, around 15,000 rupees in the beginning, and they could gradually be phased down in line with the cost reduction trends for electric two-wheelers. Now I'm going to talk about the three-wheeler segment. And first, I'll be just presenting certain insights into the electric three-wheeler market. So the electric three-wheeler market the EV uptake in the three-wheeler market in India is actually the highest across all the different vehicle segments, and EV uptake in this segment stands at 54%. However, if we dive deeper into the market dynamics, we find that approximately 78% of all the electric three-wheelers that were registered in the country, they comprised of the e-rickshaw segment. So essentially, it is this segment which has been driving the high uptake of EVs in this segment. Talking about the other major sub-segments of three-wheelers which are there in the market, which is the goods three-wheeler segment and the passenger three-wheeler segment. The goods three-wheeler segment has again shown an impressive EV uptake of 26%. However, for the passenger three-wheeler segment, which we commonly know as autos, the EV uptake stands at 14%. So, taking all these into account, we dive into understanding what are the challenges that the passenger three-wheeler segment is facing in the EV uptake. And through the analysis, it has come up that financing for the electric passenger three-wheelers has emerged as a challenge. And 70% of the passenger three-wheeler owners, they rely on financing. However, despite that, like I just mentioned, financing continues to be a challenge for this segment, essentially because the financiers are facing uncertainty of investment returns. And this is basically arising because of the fact that there is a lack of performance track record for electric three-wheelers. The resale value for these vehicles is unknown, and there is currently a low demand for these vehicles. And the way in which this is reflecting in the market is that there is limited availability of finance. Even if finance is available, it is available at a higher interest rate, and the payback periods are shorter. So here we explore the opportunity of addressing these financing related barriers through repackaging of the incentives under the scheme in the form of offering interest subventions for the passenger three-wheeler segment. And we examine the impact that this kind of an intervention would have on the total cost of ownership of the passenger electric three-wheeler, and we compare it with the TCO of the CNG three-wheeler. And what we find is that under these three interest subvention scenarios that we have analyzed at 5%, 11%, and 15%, if the interest subvention is kept at about 15%, as much as 50%, about 47% of the cost gap between the electric three-wheeler and the CNG three-wheeler can be bridged, which can significantly help in accelerating the uptake of EVs in this vehicle segment. Further, these measures can also be coupled with initiatives like credit guarantees and longer payback periods so that the financing related challenges can be eased out. And pulling all this analysis together for enhancing the uptake of EVs in the passenger three-wheeler segment, it could be considered that lower interest rates, longer payback periods, and credit guarantees could be offered to this vehicle segment to address the financing related barriers. Now I move on to the passenger car segment. Now, under the recently concluded FAME 2 scheme, only the commercial passenger cars were offered incentives, and private passenger cars were not under the scope of the scheme's benefits. However, here we undertake an analysis wherein we examine that if a similar level of incentive of 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour is offered to private passenger cars, which is the same level of incentive which was offered to the commercial passenger cars, what would this kind of subsidy level have an impact on the cost dynamics for the EVs? So we undertake an upfront cost analysis and the TCO analysis, wherein we compare the electric passenger car with the conventional counterparts, which is the gasoline, diesel, and CNG passenger car. What we find is that in the absence of subsidies, the upfront cost of the electric passenger car is about 1.5 times that of the conventional passenger cars on an average. And if this level of subsidy is offered of 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, between 50 to 100% of this upfront cost gap between the electric and the conventional vehicles can be bridged depending upon which fuel type we are analyzing. Now, talking about the total cost of ownership, The electric passenger car is already cheaper than the gasoline and the diesel vehicles, even without incentives. However, the electric passenger car continues to be more expensive on a TCO basis than the CNG vehicle. However, the incentive that we are analyzing here, taking that into account, the electric passenger car becomes competitive with the CNG vehicle on a TCO basis. Now, going forward, uptake of EVs in the passenger car segment is could potentially lead to a lot of benefits to the ecosystem for accelerating the uptake of EVs in the entire market. And this is because it is expected that going forward, the demand for personal passenger cars is expected to rise in the country due to the rising living standards and the desire for an enhanced travel safety. And under the scheme, and under the previous scheme, only the commercial passenger cars were covered, which represented a very small share of just 4% of the car sales in India. So there is a great opportunity to help in electrification of a very large vehicle segment in the country if incentives could be offered to this vehicle segment. Further, electrification of this vehicle segment can lend significant benefits in lowering of the cost for batteries for electric vehicles because the batteries which go into electric passenger cars are 10 to 20 times larger than what go into smaller vehicles like two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And hence, even if a demand for a small number of electric passenger cars could be created, it could have significant impact in enhancing the demand for batteries for EVs, which would ultimately lead to reduction in the battery cost and would ultimately cause reduction in the prices of the EVs. In totality, the electrification of this vehicle segment could be enhanced by offering a purchase subsidy of at least 10,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, and that could help in significantly accelerating the uptake of EVs in this vehicle segment. Now, next, I'm going to talk about the bus segment. So, beginning with a few market dynamics, there are about 2 million buses in the country at this point of time. And about 150,000 of these buses are public transport buses, which are owned and operated by the state transport undertakings. And these are the vehicles which have been availing incentives under the previous iterations of the scheme. However, these vehicles only represent about 7% of the registered bus population in the country. And the rest, 93%, are private buses. And these, despite representing a majority of the market, are yet to avail incentives under the FAME scheme. So the analysis that we have undertaken has brought out certain insights about the potential of uptake of electric buses in the market. Large private operators have been found to give significant importance to fuel efficiency, and they also have the necessary resources, and they are also willing to invest in fuel efficient technologies. Coupled with that is their concern about the rising fuel prices. And because of this, the large private operators have expressed their willingness to invest in electric bus technology. Now, taking the analysis a step further, private intercity buses have been found to represent a significant share of the bus travel in the country, accounting for 57% of all the bus trips in India and 63% of the total bus kilometers traveled in India. So, about 40% of all the intercity bus travel in India is in the range of about 250 to 300 kilometers, and already existing models in the market are able to meet these range requirements. Coupled with this is the fact that private intercity buses have high utilization because their daily run is high in terms of kilometers, and that is why they have the potential to offer an attractive TCO when electric buses are used. And that brings us to the conclusion that that electrification of private intercity buses could be prioritized, and that could help in creating scale in the electric bus market and eventually could also help in driving down the costs. Now, talking about the challenges that this vehicle segment is facing at this point of time. So, financing has emerged as one of the major challenges in electric bus uptake in the country. Again, the financiers are facing uncertainty of investment returns, and that is essentially because the electric bus costs continue to be very high. The demand for electric buses is low, and the resale value is unknown, or it is considered to be low. And this is reflecting in the market in the way that there is limited availability of finance, the interest rates are high, which leads to a high interest and installment burden. Now, having said that, it has also come up that the average profits that an electric bus is able to generate on intercity operations are actually higher than what the diesel buses would provide over the entire service life of the bus. However, the challenge here is that due to the current financing landscape, the annual profits that would be earned during the loan tenure would actually be lower than the diesel buses on account of the high interest rate and the high installment burden. And it is also possible that in certain years of the loan tenure, even losses could be suffered. So these are the challenges which are being faced, and taking that into account, electric bus adoption in the country could be enhanced and expanded by facilitating access to favorable financing through measures such as interest subvention, longer loan tenures, and credit guarantees to ease out the financing related challenges that this vehicle segment faces. And now coming down to the last segment that I'm going to talk about, which is the truck segment. So the truck segment is the one segment which is yet to be covered under the FAME scheme's benefit. However, it is pertinent to note that this segment represents a very important share in the country's CO2 emissions from the road transport sector. So the medium and heavy duty trucks, although they represent just 3% of India's on-road vehicle fleet, they contribute to 44% of the CO2 emissions which are rising from road transport in India. And further research that we have undertaken at ICCT has found that for India to achieve its climate commitment of limiting global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, it will have to achieve 100% zero emission truck sales by 2045 and latest by 2050 to meet the 2070 net zero target. Now, in order to accelerate the uptake of trucks, we examine how incentives can help in bringing about cost parity and helping in enhancing the uptake of electric trucks in the market. We undertake an assessment here wherein we study the impact of a subsidy of 20,000 rupees per kilowatt hour for trucks, which is the same level of subsidy which has been offered for buses under the scheme previously. And for representation purpose, we have taken a 16-ton truck here. What is found is that in the absence of incentives, the upfront cost of the electric truck is about 4 times that of the comparable diesel truck. However, if we have an incentive of 20,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, about 60% of this upfront cost gap can be bridged. Now, talking about the total cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership of the battery electric truck is about 1.4 times that of the conventional truck. In a scenario where we have incentive of 20,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, about 90% of the cost gap can be bridged. And if these measures are also supplemented by policy interventions like toll tax waivers and road tax waivers, the electric truck actually can become slightly cheaper by about 5% than the conventional diesel truck. Now, since electrification of trucks is something which is yet to begin, it's just at a nascent stage in the country at this point of time with just a few pilot projects. It is also helpful to identify the use cases where electric truck adoption is easy and the electric trucks adoption can begin with. So we have identified certain principles which makes it easy to identify what are the easy to electrify trucking applications. So some of these principles are the fact that applications where there is low route variability because it helps in enhancing the predictability of the range requirement, sufficient idle time which would facilitate easy charging of the vehicle, adequate duty cycle, which could contribute to making economic sense for the electric truck, and predictable payload. So, taking these principles into account, we have seen that there are certain operations and applications wherein trucks are also deployed in government operations, such as there are water tankers, there are anti-smog gun trucks, garbage trucks, construction waste trucks. So, considering the fact that the uptake of trucks, of battery electric trucks, is at a nascent stage, and there is skepticism with respect to this new technology, uh, beginning with electrification of those trucks which are deployed for government operations can help in serving as demonstrations and can help in building confidence in the market with respect to the electric truck technology. And eventually, there are also applications in the private truck segment as well, which have shown these principles, which make them easy to electrify, such as the drayage trucks, the trucks in the cement industry, fruit and vegetable trucks, and dairy trucks. So eventually, these applications could also be targeted for enhancing the uptake of electric trucks. And then bringing into perspective certain insights into the trucking market in India. So about 80% of the players in the market own a fleet of up to 10 trucks, and majority of the players have faced challenges with respect to capital and financing. And because of these reasons, they are unable or even reluctant to invest in new vehicle technologies. So, taking that into account, it is expected that electric truck uptake is going to be spearheaded by large operators. And that is actually what is being seen at this point of time, that most of the electric truck pilots, which are happening in the country, are being undertaken by large corporations and large companies. However, for the electrification of trucks to happen at scale within this segment, the smaller operators would also require some support so that they can also benefit from the transition. So, pulling all the analysis together, electric truck uptake in the country could be expanded by launching targeted purchase subsidy programs, which could initially focus on the trucks which are deployed in government operations, which could help in building confidence in the technology. And eventually, these subsidy programs could be expanded to include the private truck operators, and it could be ensured that smaller operators also are able to benefit from these subsidy programs, so that it can be ensured that the larger part of the market can also benefit from such programs. So that's about it from my side. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sumati, for this wonderful presentation. Before we move forward, a quick reminder, people who are joining this session online, if you have any questions on any of the slides which the presenters are making or any comments, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can use that button to type your questions. And once we hear everyone, we will take the questions. So thanks, Sumati. I would now like to invite Dr. Aditya Ramji. Aditya, you heard and you're also pretty much aware of the FAME 2 scheme. If you could throw some light on the US IRA and how it is doing and in terms of creating demand for electrification of transport in the US. So over to you, Aditya.
Thanks so much, Amit, and to ICT and ET for hosting this and having us here. Keeping with the tale of two geographies, so let me try and kind of set the story for what has been a little bit of the context for the US regulation. But just to kind of put some numbers in the foray. So EV sales right now in the US for light duty vehicles or cars and passenger vehicles is at the end of 2023 ended up at around 9.3%. We're still continuing that same momentum into the first half of 2024. And this is a significant jump from about 4.5% back in 2021. So in about the last 3 years. And then what's also important in this context is 80% of this is battery electric vehicles, and then about 20% plug-in hybrid EVs, which also form a significant part of the EV definition in the United States. But just like any other country in the last decade, the US EV policy kind of began as an incentive program. But unlike India and most other countries that were doing upfront purchase subsidies, the US actually was offering income tax credits for consumers. So you bought a vehicle at its upfront purchase price, and then you had to file your tax reimbursement in the following year. And then obviously there is enough evidence to show that that upfront purchase subsidies are far more effective. But then the pandemic happened, and the general narrative globally around vehicle electrification, started taking a much stronger industrial policy approach. And the need for a slightly more integrated thinking around demand and supply, and that's where the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and one more important legislation in the United States, often otherwise known as the infrastructure law or the bipartisan infrastructure law, both were passed in 2022. And the combination of those two kind of made for a very pivotal shift in US policy for vehicle electrification. The current approach to the US, so within the US IRA, what it did is it essentially transformed the way the incentives will be given. So essentially, there are two parts to this. There is the demand side incentive that end users or consumers can get, but there's a very strong compliance on the manufacturing side and the supply side that needs to happen to ensure that that this incentive actually is made available to the end user. So the way this works currently in the US is that you can get up to a maximum of $7,500 per EV all the way from now until 2032. And then, but it has so let me kind of try to break down some of the important components of this. So on the end user side, as an EV potential EV buyer, there is a price cap on the vehicle, much like India does as part of its FAME program. So it's 55. But what the US program does is it actually differentiates the price cap for electric vehicles for cars and then for SUVs. So it's $55,000 for cars and then $80,000 for SUVs. And then in addition to the vehicle price cap, there is also a household income cap. So this is introduced essentially to ensure that the subsidy doesn't have leakages to higher income households or individuals who could afford purchase EVs and transition even without incentives. And then the most important part that the IRA did from an industrial policy standpoint was it broke the EV incentive into two parts. So from a manufacturer standpoint, now 50% of the EV incentive was eligible. So $3,750 would be available for the vehicle if it met requirements on critical mineral sourcing criteria as they're defined under the law. And then the remaining 50% if it met the battery component value add as defined under the law. Now, irrespective of all of this, the fundamental other manufacturer requirement is that the vehicle has to be mandatorily assembled in North America. And in the US context, that just takes an important significance because we have what's called the USMCA free trade region, which is Canada, United States, and Mexico. And a lot of the automotive manufacturing does actually happen in Mexico for the United States as well. But then, and then the way the supply side the supply side or the manufacturer side of it is further set up is there is a very significant increase in the critical mineral sourcing criteria. So in 2023, 40%, and now in 2024, 50%, and it goes up to 80% in 2027 of the critical minerals by value need to be sourced from either the North America region or any country that the US has a free trade agreement with. And then in terms of the battery component, value add in terms of domestic manufacturing requirements. It's 50% today, and it actually goes up to 100% in 2029. The reason this is interesting is it actually not just provides for an incentive on the demand side, but it actually ensures that the US is actually able to create a very strong manufacturing capability and truly really be able to create domestic value add as part of this transition. What this also means is that given the criteria around the incentive structure, there's an increasing amount of innovation and R&D in trying to bring down vehicle costs and kind of meet these requirements. The one other piece that is there in the regulation is that any EV, to be eligible as long as it meets all of this, has to have a minimum battery capacity of 7 kilowatt hours, and that's kind of an additional requirement. And this is for the light duty segment and the medium heavy duty segment, essentially sets kind of a baseline for minimum range requirements that an EV is supposed to serve when it's flying on the road. But in addition to all of this, the Inflation Reduction Act also introduced some other interesting incentives. So one, it introduced a subsidy or a tax credit for used EVs. So there is a $4,000 subsidy up to about 30% vehicle price as long as the used EV is priced under $25,000. The vehicle must be at least 2 years old. And then, of course, there are income caps. The idea of this, again, was to be able to create a secondary market for a lot of the vehicles, especially from an equity and access to clean transportation point of view for middle and lower income households that may or may not be able to purchase a brand new vehicle. The other piece that was important and in the India context, Sumiti was talking about trucks and commercial vehicles. So the US IRA also provides for what's called a commercial vehicle tax credit. So basically, it requires anything below 6 tons to have a minimum battery size of 7 kilowatt hours, anything above that, a minimum battery size of 15 kilowatt hours. And this is essentially for businesses and commercial use cases. The subsidy is the same 7,500 if it's below 6 ton, which is kind of falls in the same category of light duty. And then actually they provide a subsidy of up to $40,000 for anything above 6 tons, which is your medium and heavy duty. So in terms of if you look at it from a current capex to subsidy ratio to capex ratio, it ranges from about anywhere as low as 11% to about 20% of the capex of buying a medium heavy duty vehicle. And actually on the light duty side, it's anywhere between 15 to 20%. Actually, on the light duty side, it compares very much with what India has in terms of an average subsidy, 15 lakh price cap, and about 2.5 lakh incentive. But what all of this has done, and then in addition to all of this, is the bipartisan infrastructure law that also came in at the same time, created a very strong pipeline of funding for charging infrastructure. So it allocated close to about $7.5 billion for EV and alternate fueling infrastructure, and they created something called NEVI, which is the new EV infrastructure formula. That basically based on the vehicle density in different states of the US, there is funding that's allocated to each state to be able to create EV infrastructure within their states, but with the idea that because it's a nationally funded program, it can create an interconnected EV infrastructure corridor across states. And so states can basically apply for the funding once they submit a plan of how they're going to roll out, how much they're going to roll out, and then they get the money from the national government. And then similarly for the charging infrastructure piece, there is a program for underserved communities, which is essentially areas, rural areas and other urban peripheral areas that are not always priority from a market perspective, are given specific allocated funds to actually be able to deploy infrastructure in these places. The one other thing I will say is that under the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA, there is also a lot of focus on, along with the commercial vehicle tax credit, which focuses on medium heavy duty trucks, there is also a major focus on on funding being allocated separately for port and dredge trucks, where there is a lot of, and Sumati, you talked about the potential for identifying use cases in the medium heavy duty segment that can have an early stage market transformation. And that's kind of where the idea of allocating funds to port and dredge trucks also came in, because that's a use case that makes economic sense for electrification. But the one thing that I will definitely say in all of this is, often we hear about the IRA and the infrastructure law in the news and the media, but you have to read these regulations not in isolation. You have to remember that there was a very interesting approach in the last 4 years where there has been a governance shift. So the US created what's called the Joint Office of the Department of Energy and Department of Transport that really brought together the two moving pieces for this transition. But what it also did was it ensured that recognized that just creating incentives will not drive the market. You still need strong regulation. And so earlier this year in March, the US government also passed one of the most stringent CAFE regulations for both light duty and medium and heavy duty vehicles that really set the tone and kind of aligned, saying that, okay, if we have to meet this 50% ambition of sales, etc., by 2035, and we are giving all these incentives, then it is going to be backed by good and strong foundational regulation. And I think that also needs to be taken into context, because that was part of the strategy that was being rolled out to make sure that the public money that's being allocated is effectively utilized for this transition. The one last thing I will say, and hand it off back to you, Amit, is the history of EV regulation in the US actually has a subnational context, which is actually it began with the state of California, but also to remember that currently California has a unique regulation, and many of you can look it up or have read about it, which is the Advanced Clean Cars and the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, which essentially sets a manufacturer requirement of sales with every progressive year. But it comes with a very interesting market mechanism of credits, which is kind of actually what really gave a lot of financial incentive to Tesla over the initial years when it made a lot of money. But that regulation is now followed by 12 other states in the US, which make up about 42% of the US light duty market. And so irrespective of what happens to federal policy, this will always remain a very strong fundamental foundation to drive EV sales, and then be able to effectively utilize the funding that's been allocated through the different regulations. I'll stop there, and thanks, Sumit, for that, and hand it back to you.
Thanks, Aditya. Very, very kind of insightful points on not only US IRA, but also how regulation and the incentives are working together. And I have some question, but I'll come to you slightly later on. Let me first bring in on this Mr. Mrityunjay Sharma at NITI Aayog. Mrityunjay, you heard both Sumati as well as an interesting case from Aditya. And we know that FAME's 2 scheme is recently concluded. So just wanted some insight, if you could share some light on, is there a possibility of FAME 3? If so, what are the current discussions that are happening in terms of electrification of transport at national level?
Hi, Amit. It's nice to interact with such great participants in the EV ecosystem. I'll try to describe the word ecosystem as we view at NITI. So at NITI, we refer to the entire ecosystem in 4 to 5 buckets. And those are either we create a demand, or we work in the manufacturing domain, or we can work in the skilling domain, financing domain, technological domain, which includes standards and specifications. When we refer to FAME, even within the media and the outside engagement with other agencies, the name FAME comes up a lot. This is one of the schemes which has helped in the domain of demand. The other buckets are lying empty, and there is a strong push now to work on those buckets as well. Even within the FAME, I believe trucks were not earlier a major focus point, but now it is. You will see in the recent times that 2 days ago, we launched a hackathon for eFast campaign, which we primarily conduct for trucks. And that has been and we have a very ambitious target to go for about 25,000 trucks by the end of the quarter. Now, trucks is an important segment, as I mentioned. Apart from that, there are discussions going on for FAME 3, but nothing cannot be said at the moment because there are a lot of constraints in that. We are waiting for an evaluation of FAME 2. Prior to my engagement with NITI, I was working at the Monitoring and Evaluation Department of NITI, which is the DMEO. And I have been involved in creating the TOR for FAME, and the evaluation is pending. Then since it's the end of the finance commission cycle, a new finance commission has been set in. We are yet to submit our evaluation reports to the finance commission. So the schemes, what we can say, the schemes re-emergence is dependent on a lot of other factors apart from its standalone factor within the EV ecosystem. That's number one. Number two, as I mentioned, there are 2 to 3 other buckets as well. There is manufacturing, there is skilling. At present, we have placed increased focus on the financing bucket. Example, 2 to 3 days ago, I was at a launch of Blue Smart's new fleet, and while speaking with the SIDBI, senior bank officials, a crucial problem statement they laid out, and that was the batteries which are being now used as a replacement for the existing vehicles whose warranty has expired and the company is not willing to repair them. They are not being financed at the moment. That is example number one. It's being excluded out of the financing ecosystem. Then the scheduled banks which are there in the market, they are not comfortable with financing EV trucks, which is a prime problem that we are trying to solve through the hackathon for the eFast campaign as well. So financing is a crucial issue for which we have seen 2 to 3 solutions. An example would be the payment security mechanism, as we saw for the bus program. It has been a phenomenal success. We have seen that OEMs have got greater confidence in working with the STUs. We are trying something similar for the trucks. And we are also looking at the insurance sector, which is an interesting angle to look at because at present, the insurance sector considers both ICE and EV vehicles the same. But ICE vehicles have been here for more than 50 years. The technology is kind of stable now. We are seeing minor improvements, while EV is seeing technological changes day and day upon. Various countries have seen that insurance companies do cover the technological risks angle as well for EVs. Now that instills a great sense of confidence among the financiers for the smaller aggregators which are there in non-urban places, because their prime finance source would be scheduled banks. They cannot go up to SIDBI directly. Okay, so these are the 2 to 3 mechanisms. Third, a unique angle was shared with the ZEVTC, the Zero Emissions Vehicle Transition Council team. We recently made a remark that we are planning to set up green finance cells, or a district level body to help aggregate finance requirements from the states. Instead of asking the states directly at the state level, who may or may not be privy to all the requirements of different smaller ecosystems within the EV community, a mechanism to aggregate district level demand. Because this particular sector has a lot of scope for micro entrepreneurs as well. I'll give an example. We do the same in PMEGP scheme, which is a MSME scheme. Now that scheme helps aggregate a demand at a very district level. We have district level task force committees headed by the SDM or the DM. They only help aggregate the demand on a centralized portal processed by a bank. You can check the entire timelines and you can know there could be unique segments in which finance could be required, which is not even known to us. That's step number 3. 4, training of not only the state officials and the industry partners, but also the people who are responsible for enforcement of the rules of the government of India on ground, and that is the RTO department. They are not being able to differentiate between an EV truck and a normal truck. And that creates a lot of issues for the EV users. And so, as I mentioned, the first FAME is a part of the demand bucket. I spoke about finance bucket. Then another crucial problem would come up in the service ecosystem, which would help retain the momentum created by FAME. We are seeing fire incidents. We are seeing that we have heard and we have first-hand cases from BlueSmart and other aggregators who are primarily the majority of the customers of Tata, that they are not repairing the batteries. Now, this is not something that can instill confidence among users. You need something to be repairable for two reasons: environmental reasons and also for cost, some sort of cost benefit to the customer. You cannot throw away 4 lakh battery, 4 lakh rupees battery. So service ecosystem is equally important, and there are ways and there are means to do so. How we are doing at NITI, if you have heard or you may have observed that NITI is now trying to set up smaller NITIs in states. Mitra is an example. So that is an attempt to help our collaboration, go deeper on a similar intellectual level with the states. And when that happens, these smaller issues will be solved, and you will see growth among the entire EV ecosystem, not only the demand segment. On the demand side, when FAME comes, if FAME comes or if it's renewed or not, it would entirely depend on the Finance Commission's evaluation report and on what my earlier friends submit to them. Please, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Thanks a lot. I think very rightly you pointed out that it's an ecosystem change and you have to go beyond just demand incentives. And I think the other point that you mentioned in terms of looking at financing, insurance, and some of these issues. Just a follow-up question on that was that, so one of the big success has been the demand aggregation, especially in the buses. Now, is that something that you are also looking at in other vehicle segment as well as an approach to bring down cost?
Yes. So if I were to break down the vehicle segments, that would be two-wheelers, which are primarily consumer-owned, which are taken care of by aggregators. The government does not need much intervention there. It's taken care of. Then we come to three-wheelers. In three-wheelers, we are seeing a good number of uptake in government use as well. For example, recently, I was preparing a cooperation plan with Ladakh, and we researched to find out, we spoke to the governor's office that last year they took a trial for three-wheeler trucks, smaller, for waste collection and disposal. So that is a niche segment that can be targeted. That's number one. Number two, we are coming to the higher, gross weightage trucks. Now that is something that is indeed being targeted. Recently, 2 to 3 days ago, we have started some discussions on interministerial discussions. They are going on how to transform this mobility sector, and internally there is a strong intent to work on sort of incentivizing the government first to adopt trucks. That will send a strong upper demand signal, but that is in place. Now, what we see in the buses, in the e-buses ecosystem is that the demand signal started with the FAME, I believe, 2019's Grand Challenge. And that was a phenomenal success. And that led to the emergence of a greater plan of creating 50,000 e-buses, and with the start of the PM e-bus program. And now we are seeing that they are, starting, they are getting unique projects from states. A similar model could come up, though I cannot confirm at the moment, but it could. It's in shape, it's in the process. We are working on trucks. I think 4 to 5 agencies are working on pilots for trucks. Now, if once that is done, we can absolutely see that trucking can see that, demand aggregation, while on the local level, the three-wheelers can also see some, but not as large as buses, please.
Thanks, Mrityunjay, for this wonderful insight. And one of the issues that Mrityunjay mentioned was skilling, and on that, let me bring in Mr. Vinkesh. Vinkesh, as you know, that EV transition would require a considerable amount of skilling, reskilling of workforce. So my question was, can you shed some light on some of the challenges that you foresee in this space, and what is it that some of the initiatives that are being taken to address this whole issue of skilling?
Thanks, Amit, for inviting for the show. Upskilling our full force towards the electric vehicles. Obviously, it's still in the nascent stage, and normally I always quote, there has been a press media coverage where they have said that all those vehicles you have bought, there are no electric vehicle technicians on the market. I don't agree to that statement, but yes, the gap is there. The gap is huge. But on the other hand, we should also consider that these electric vehicles are not come from some another planet. It still uses 50% of items which are used in normal ICE products also, which are motors, suspensions, tires, and everything. So it's not that we can't, the technicians or the team is not prepared for that. But the position current is, yes, if I talk about the battery side, or if I talk about the side towards where BMS is considered or the motor is concerned, that is where the skilling is needed. And ASDC is working very hard on that. We already have some 8 or 9 courses on electric vehicle online, which is free, on EV charging, EV basics, and all those things which are there on ASDC website. ASDC has done a lot of tie-ups with many important players to impart the training. Some of the biggest being GIZ program, which is tie-up with Germany's skilling company, where we do the green skills training for EV service technicians, where we aim to train ITI candidates in electric vehicle. And it's happening in Gurgaon, and then it's a trial project, and it will be done at different ITIs all over India. Additionally, we are even doing the other side, like we've tied up with Bihar Skill Development Mission, where we are training 350 women to drive e-carts. Like Mrityunjay said, that the waste and all that is being used. We are trying to do that also, that it helps in our gender diversity and the electric vehicle also. There is a project Saksham, which is tied up with Hero MotoCorp, where we do two-wheeler technician training, in which there are some batches which is purely based for electric vehicle training that is going on. GIZ, through GIZ, we are doing one more project, which is for the buses specifically, where there are 3 kinds of training. One is sensitization on electric bus fire safety to the bus drivers and the cleaners. And the second is safe practices in operation and maintenance of electric bus fleet for the mid-level officials. And the third is emergency response for electric bus fires and best practices for the ground staff, which is mechanics and drivers. So obviously, for us, it's a learning thing, and every day we come up with some challenges about how to handle this on the support of the vehicles and electric systems in the vehicle. And our team is regularly in touch with the manufacturers, the component manufacturers. We have industry groups where we are finding the challenges and making the curriculum, which is then openly shared as an open source in our ASDC website, which is asdc.gov.in, where anybody can see the curriculum, which gives even details of the course content and hours needed for that course. It will take time, where because see, EV is just, I feel, what, 5, 7 years or 10 years in India, whereas ICE has been what, since ages. It's stabilized. We'll be faster reaching the stabilized position in EV also. Recently, we have tied up with AICT also to add a 60-hour course on electric vehicles, maintenance and all, in the normal engineering courses also. Any BTech course, BTech student can opt for that specialization or a course. With NEP coming in, where the credit is easily used for the graduation or post-graduation courses, we are trying that ASDC could give that courses. And ASDC is already an accredited body, where whatever courses we do, the credit can be used in their normal courses also. So we are pushing that also. We're tied up with CBSE also, so that the kids from 6th to 12th are aware about automotive and what are the changes on green technology, hydrogen, EV, and everything. So there is a short-term plan and the long-term plan. Long-term plan comes from the education side, which is AICT, CBSE. The short-term plan comes from all these training partners, which give the courses and all. Maybe in the last 5 minutes, I've told you we are doing a lot, but obviously it is not, because we are able to touch only what, around 1,000 or 2,000 max in a year. Be doing 5 to 10,000, and I feel a lot has to be done, and a lot is more. We are trying to rope into all manufacturers to partner with us to launch this electric vehicle courses, because that is one thing is for sure, that electrification is to be there, And I don't know if it is 100% or what, but it will be the major part of our automobile vehicle in the future.
We also agree that electrification is the way forward, and we can talk about the pace of it. But what is inevitable is the transition will happen to electric. On that, let me bring another interesting insight, and let me bring Mansha to comment one specific issue that keeps coming. It's financing, and which always continues to be a major challenge. And we did hear Mrityunjay talk a little bit about it. But Mansha, if you could share some insight on one, financing is a challenge, and especially in the heavy duty vehicle segment, and how it can be resolved. Over to you.
Thank you, ICCT and ETAuto for inviting me, and really, really interesting perspectives. The financing as a challenge, and I think Sumati kind of gave a very good overlay, not just to the heavy duty vehicles, but to the overall ecosystem. I think there's some challenges which are very common across in terms of financing across board, which is your typical residual value challenge, technology risk, higher technology risk perceived by financiers, lack of long-term warranties and insurances. Then there's no secondary market to sort of deal with it. So obviously there are a lot many challenges which are very, very known, which lead to very typical problems of giving very costly financing terms, shorter tenors, and costlier financing terms, lower LTVs. All that is very, very known. Now, what it does is it's not specific to HDVs, but it is aggravated in HDVs simply because the cost of the asset is very high, very similar as what Sumati was saying. It's not just, but I would rather want to talk about both buses and private sector and HDV trucks, because both of them sort of have a very, very strong overlay, and they should now, as a community, we need to start talking about it together, because 90% of your bus operations are also private, and your trucking operations also, in terms of just the system of it, it's very disaggregated. Majority of them have very less vehicles. It's like 5 vehicles, less than 5 vehicles for buses, less than 10 vehicles, as Sumati told, for 80% of the vehicles, 80% of the operators for trucks. So the problem statement is majority the same. The advantage is also similar, right? If you look at the transition trajectory, in your keeping your STUs aside for a moment, the private intercity buses, the ones which run longer kilometers, have very similar demands, have very similar structures to what you're talking about in HDV. So what we really need to do is think about an ecosystem creation. And as soon as you want to create an ecosystem, what Mrityunjay was saying about the government side of things coming first, that is something where we need to take advantage of. And I want to give a very different angle to this financing, rather than just talking about your typical financing and things that we've already heard of. What we need to do is, and if you see, international cases, in Europe and other places, wherever you've seen some good level of penetration in trucks, what really happens is, in the chicken and egg story, your charging comes first. And as soon as you come up with it's not a very significant cost. We've done our own analysis, even on lifetime basis, etc. It's like 5%, 6% cost for charging. But in terms of your perceived risk for adoption, it's a very, very high risk. So the first thing that the government needs to sort of take care of, because it's very well positioned to do it, is identify those prioritized corridors where it has an overlay of demand that includes the utilization part of these chargers. That's where you really need to overlay the heavy duty truck segment and the bus segments, because the cost of charger investments are very, very high in this case. And use those prioritized corridors that, okay, this is where the movement is going to happen. This is what we are going to prioritize. We already have our Bharatmala Yojana. We already have our Gati Shakti. All of these plans need to just come out with a synchronized list of phased charging corridors being created. Once that is done, one significant portion of a mental block of adopting this is taken care of. And I think the solutions that Mrityunjay was pointing out, in terms of aggregation at a district level, at a state level, all that will start making a very good, at least showcasing a viable scenario of when this adoption can happen. In terms of financing, obviously the government cannot at least prima facie does not look like it's a perspective, and also internationally it is not done, cannot give a viability gap funding to any of the private operators, whether it is for buses or it is for trucks, right? Like it is giving in, say, PME Bus Seva. But what it can do is, they can, in this phased transition plan, when you're talking about charging, the VGF support and the upstream power infrastructure support can be the support that is given to chargers. Your charging corridors are ready, and after that, you start focusing on the solutions which are purely market-driven solutions, like Mrityunjay is saying, which is, obviously starting with aggregation of demand. That obviously is the first thing that you need to do. But other than that, we really need to qualify and double qualify this phasing in terms of bringing out these financial products as well. Your small fleet operators will not take up heavy duty trucks in the first phase. Your small bus operators will not take it, right? Who will take it up? There has to be this level of government interventions followed by large operators, creating that critical mass, that it is at that stage in the S curve, when it is at that scaled uptake stage, wherein all these de-risking and blended finance solutions that we keep talking about come in, and then help the smaller operators to open up. And this transition is not a very long drawn transition. As Aditya was saying, right, in California in 3 years they doubled their penetration from 4.5 to over 9%. So it is not like this is something that we're talking about umpteen number of years. What we are just talking about is a structured way of looking at financing as a solution to open up the market. The other thing that is very, very essential, and wherein DFIs and multilaterals and bilateral like World Bank, ATPs, other IFIs of the world can really come in, is that we can help in structuring these financial products. But again, where does the government really take the lead? The government takes a lead in setting up the structures in a financial intermediary application so that these financial products can be rolled out, right? Even if you look at your payment security mechanism, which is for the STUs, government is sitting at the back of it, right? And that's why you could get like that free flow of capital. A very common example of a very good new example of leveraging something like this is Vertello, which Macquarie is doing. They have a junior equity structure through GCF. They're using it and mobilizing it to raise multiple multipliers of that financing and getting debt, right? That's the kind of structures that we need to really invest in. Whether it is an asset leasing platform, whether it is a blended finance and de-risking platform, those are the kind of financing solutions that are needed to open up the HTV market, open up the e-bus market. But it's important, like we all keep talking about the ecosystem approach, but it is important to also understand that you want the ecosystem or even these separate market segments to become sustainable and go to that market adoption stage. What we are doing as a community here is just adding or acting as an accelerator so that this market segment reaches that maturity sooner than what has been the typical sort of adoption cycle for ICE vehicle types. So that I'll stop there, but that's what I really think that the financing ecosystem should look like. Thank you.
Thanks, Mansha. Absolutely. Yeah, that is the way forward. On that, let me bring one interesting question that has come from the audience. And Shalini is asking, maybe I'll bring all the panelists to ponder upon this point, is that what, in view of the sale of hybrids taking over EVs, especially a lot of discussion is happening, is this impacting the EV sales in India and US? So maybe I'll first bring in Aditya to share the US perspective, and then maybe I'll request Vinkesh to share the India perspective.
I think the hybrid story, I think in the US maybe needs to be broken down. Unlike India, we currently don't really have the plug-in hybrid concept that has really come into the market. Also because the regulation doesn't really incentivize that in the current moment. But in the US, the hybrid ecosystem is, there's the regular hybrids, which are mild and strong hybrids, and then there is the plug-in hybrids. So as I said earlier, in the US ecosystem, within EV sales as defined by the regulation, about 20% or so at the national level is plug-in hybrids. But if you get down to regional level, you'll find, depending on where people are located, etc., there is preference for plug-in hybrids over BEVs, depending on infrastructure challenges, etc. But even then, if you do a life cycle analysis approach with current grid mix, etc., you don't see, you will still see net benefits that accrue in terms of the emissions. But and then if you talk about the regular hybrids, right? So I think this is do remember that even in countries like the US or any other markets where where the regulation pushes for very high EV shares over the next decade, you're still going to have to deal with a pretty large fleet of existing IC engine vehicles that are going to be in the system. So if they are more efficient regular hybrid vehicles today that will be in my ecosystem even 7 years from now, I would rather have those than have IC engine vehicles that are less efficient. So I think it needs to be looked at in that context. But at the same time, right, and this is where I think the earlier point we were talking about the importance of cafe regulations, etc., that address this issue not just from a technology shift perspective, but also about how you actually deal with your ongoing stock and fleet of vehicles that will remain in the market for a foreseeable future to have to deal with that. So hopefully that addresses the question, Amit.
Sure. Thanks. Vinkesh, you want to add any point on this?
So Amit, basically, I'll be frank. See, in India, hybrid are not very, you can say, as incentivized as electric vehicles are. So obviously, not a lot of players are there in the market. The biggest players being only Maruti and Toyota, which have these products. And coincidentally, the price of an EV is normally starts at what 10 around 10. If it is a Tata, goes up to Mahindra around 15 and then above. Whereas if I talk about hybrid, the lowest hybrid would be what? A Toyota Hyryder would be what, around 18 lakhs, or a Maruti Grand Vitara, which would be 19 lakhs. So I feel, one, they don't eat into each other, because hybrids are very, very costly as compared to EV. But yes, uh, with some states giving them benefit, there are discussion going on that can it be taking over from the EV, which I don't feel so. There could be some players, some customers who are interested, who can do that, but not all. It won't give that much effect. And in all the 33 UTs, 33 or what UTs and states, there are only three states which still respect this. Like UP has just, this all has started with the last month's UP thing, which has started giving 10% road tax benefit to the hybrid. And they are also now thinking if they want to implement FAME to eligibility criteria to hybrid also. But that is also in the discussion. Chandigarh has it, which has only a 50% rebate, but that too limited to some odd thousand vehicle numbers which are already over. Uh, the Chhattisgarh also has, but that too is a very small amount of. So all India, I don't feel so ki hybrid are still being incentivized in any way. The GST is normal, the road taxes are normal. So I don't think so that seeing the price segment and how the government is currently reviewing hybrid, there'll be any effect on EVs.
Thanks, Vinkesh. Yeah, good point. One more question which has come from Pawan, and any of you can have your opinion, is this question of retrofitting. While the question is about heavy-duty vehicles in general, but let me broaden this question. Is retrofitting a viable option from ICE to electric? Is that, Aditya, something that you're seeing in the US? And then I would request the panelists to also comment if that is a viable proposition.
Thanks, Amit. The regulation in the US allows, so there are standards in place that allow for retrofitting of diesel trucks to electric, or even cars, gasoline cars to electric. But we haven't really seen a significant uptake, and I think a big reason for that is retrofitting an older vehicle is not just about retrofitting powertrain. Sometimes, depending on the age of the vehicle, there are other aspects of the vehicle that need to be fixed, etc. So by the time you end up doing all of this and meeting all the safety compliance requirements, etc., for the new EV that has been created, the costs can actually stack up pretty quickly. But if you compare that to an actually new battery electric or plug-in hybrid truck, you actually realize that the new ecosystem, a brand new vehicle is far more cost competitive to deliver and deploy with guaranteed, performance metrics with new battery chemistries and all of that stuff. So I would say the jury is still a little out. It's still early days, but at least even the US and in California, with in the last 2 years, the significant amount of electric truck deployment has all mostly been brand new electric trucks that have been deployed and not really retrofitted. So at least that's really the trend that we're seeing here.
So Amit, I'll add in this. If you remember, Delhi government uh, uh, verified and announced 25 odd agencies which can retrofit in Delhi. They even gave an advertisement and government order that people should go, but I feel it didn't catch up. And like Aditya was very clear, a normal person thinks about electric, changing to electric or getting retrofit after what 7 or 10 years of the vehicle, not within 0 to 5 years. So if you're talking about 5 years later, your vehicle's resale price is already bad. Your body structure or the vehicle power to take that weight of battery to continue is not as good as new. So it's very difficult to ascertain that even after retrofit, will he have the similar kind of life if he buys a new vehicle, or how much life will he have to run that vehicle on the road? Because that vehicle which he is retrofitting would be what, BS1 or BS2, which was made up to that standards which are being shifted today. And those standard means at that time safety norms wasn't also that strong in India. The regulations weren't that strong. Means once he retrofits and goes for the registration, he has to also update his all those regulations which has happened in between his vehicle being made and today being retrofitted.
Thanks, Venkesh. Mansha, any insight on that?
Actually, I was just I completely agree with both of them. The only thing that I was going to add is, the biggest compromise that retrofitting does is against the payload also. So your revenue earning ability of the vehicle itself gets compromised. You have to do a significant investment in the, it's almost like 30%, 40% of the cost, right? You have to put in that much investment, and then you have absolutely no guarantee on what is the kind of life or the output or the potential revenue earnings. It's a very cash flow driven business, and that is something that needs to be really, really accounted for. So retrofitting prima facie looks like it is an attractive solution. One, there are no complete standards which are in place. Two, your revenue earning ability is compromised. Basically, your returns to the investment really does not qualify because your payload itself also gets compromised. So, especially for trucks, I don't see them as a solution. And lastly, in India, anyways, if you see, there is a significant amount of on-road fleet which is beyond its useful life, right? So these vehicles are already at the verge of getting scrapped. What we are saying is, instead of getting scrapped, let's put in a new system into it and let it go. That has significant safety concerns as well, like Aditya and Vinkesh pointed out. So absolutely, retrofitting is early days, and if we are able to get very viable solutions around it, good enough. But prima facie does not look like something which is very attractive, both from a policy and safety point of view, but also from a market adoption point of view. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Mansha. And one last question, which has come from Rishi, is that for the purpose of financing, can we develop a carbon trading market where stakeholders can benefit from such a platform? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely. I think that is one thing that is a very big and significant untapped potential for India. But the problem there is, whether it is for trucks or whether it is for smaller vehicles, and we've tried it. We've actually developed the framework as part of the bank. We've done it for 2-3 wheelers. We have at least understood, at least in terms of the technical standpoints of it. And the same can be sort of, brought in for other vehicles. The basic problem is, firstly, the rights of it, right? And who will take the carbon credit right? There are parts which, the manufacturer wants to take it, the owner of the vehicle wants to take it, or whether the operator takes it. Who really takes the benefit of the game becomes, or the financier takes it, right? Because they want to ultimately also take it as a revenue and reduce the financing cost to the borrower. So that is the first question that needs to be answered. The second question is, there is a very significantly high level of disaggregated data, and that data is something that you need to, and for actually tapping into carbon credits, this needs to be monitored on a real time basis. Even if you don't do it on a real time basis and you do it on an aggregated basis, there is some strong level of, cloud computing, and your data requirements, your uh, all those kind of, data security requirements that plug in, because these are individuals who are going from point A to point B, and you're tracking their movements, right? And they're linked to, say, a chassis number or a car number, which makes the person who's driving it or operating it very, very identifiable. So with India not having its fully implemented data privacy norms, fully implemented carbon structures, this becomes very difficult. Thirdly, it is important that the framework itself recognizes this as a potential activity to be included in the carbon credit mechanism, right? Like, for example, even today, buses are not included. Trucks are not included under the Article 6.2, which allows for this carbon crediting mechanism. So there are a lot of policy regulations and framework setting that needs to happen before this can be looked at as an attractive mechanism. Because let's be honest, one unit of any vehicle type, even the higher odds of, buses, or the trucks, which are big emitters, over its lifetime, it will not give you that much value because of the high transaction cost of this market. And currently, the trading of it in the voluntary markets, the prices that are there are very, very low for you to even make sense in the transaction side of things. So that part is completely unviable. The viability of it also comes very similar to, like we are talking about everything else. It stays there in aggregation, and to allow that level of aggregation, there is a lot of data frameworks, who owns the credit, the methodology that you want to do it, all of that being sanctioned and, being allowed as a activity under the Indian regulations to be actually getting something of value out of the carbon credits. However, it's a very attractive market. Globally, we are working quite strongly in the segment, and we'd be happy to sort of, delve more into it and, gain more insights about it. But
Sure.
yeah,
Thanks.
it's a little
Thanks.
far-fetched for now.
Absolutely. So with this, we have come to the close. But before I formally close the webinar, I would give one last chance, maybe 20, 30 seconds, one last chance to all the panelists if they have to make any final interventions. So maybe we'll start with Aditya.
Sure. I'll just say that, in the spirit of Tale of Two Geographies, I think what the US has, the lessons, at least from the US piece, on being able to integrate demand side incentives with supply side regulations and bring that together. I think India has the pieces. We have a PLI, we have the incentive program, we're working on the CAFE. The point is, can we align all of them to come together and happen together simultaneously under one larger coordinated framework, get to that goal? I think that is really what, in terms of a lesson learned for me from the US approach in the last 2 years, would be the takeaway.
Thanks, Aditya. You stole my concluding statement, but yeah, thanks for doing it. Sumati?
I think that the initiatives that have been taken by the national governments, both in India and the US, they have been extremely useful in overcoming the barriers that are currently being faced for accelerating the adoption of EVs. Going forward, more targeted policies which can resolve very specific challenges that each of the vehicle segment faces, like some segment face financing related challenges, some other segments have very specific challenges with respect to the market uptake, with respect to the technology. So all of these need to be taken into account, and the policies could be tailored to target and resolve these specific challenges. And yeah, I think there's a lot of things that could be learned from different geographies as well.
Thanks. Vinkesh?
I'll try to become more practical towards the customer end side because I'm from that side. So, what I feel to really ensure the successful EV transition, the government first has to give a fixed role what they actually want. All those knee-jerk reaction, somebody saying petrol won't be there, petrol two-wheeler won't be there, and this is all always hurt the customer sentiment in India. And you know how Indian customers are, literacy level and how they follow the leader and all that. We need a future path which is sure at least not 2030, maybe till 2050. That where does the government want the OEMs to go, the customer to go, and to the dealers to go, will help us a lot. Second, I feel there are a lot of myths in electric vehicle, starting from range anxiety towards charging station and all that. In India, we don't travel so much that range can be an issue, or we do need a charging station every time we start a vehicle. There's all a myth which has been created. I feel we all need to, it's our duty to get that myth being busted. On the finance side, no doubt whatever support is needed, government has to give. But I feel one thing which can change the perspective would be if EV can be given a status of a priority lending to banks, where they are compulsorily, mandatorily, like they do with agriculture. So every bank has a mandatory priority lending to electric vehicles, will automatically, and with a subsidy on interest, automatically will push a lot. And I feel whatever I am saying will help the customer to adapt the EV faster. So if with whatever Aditya and ma'am has said, comes from the government and the manufacturer, at least customers are also ready to take it with open hands.
Mansha, last 30 seconds.
I think I'm just gonna continue the thought that Pinkesh said. I think what we need is not a very long, far-fetched vision that people who are living today cannot really envisage what's gonna happen that time. What we really need is phased targets, phased transition plan, which has clear mandates and implementable mandates, along with an or incentive plan which is applicable both at the federal level and at federal level. So, a clear indication to the industry that this is the pathway that India is adopting. These are the phase targets. This is how we are going to apply it, and these are what we are going to offer you as incentives. That is a very clear thing that we need to start today, and I think Ministry of Heavy Industries is taking strides in that. But hopefully that actually gets converted and into something which is implementable, and that then gives a clear direction for the industry to move forward. That's my closing comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mansha. And thank you to all the panelists. Such a rich and fruitful discussion. I mean, the spirit was a tale of two geographies, and we did learn a lot from India and US and how both the nations are kind of marching towards a transition towards zero emission vehicle. This webinar was hosted by ICCT and ETAuto, and it's part of ICCT's India's Avalanche initiatives. We will keep on kind of hosting these discussions forward. We do want to make sure that you participate in these discussions. Before we conclude, let me thank once again Mrityunjay Sharma from Niti Aayog for sparing his time joining us, Mansha from the World Bank, Vinkesh from the Automotive Skill Development Council, Aditya Ramji from UC Davis, and Sumati Kohli from ICCT. With this, we come to the end of the webinar. And again, thank you to the colleagues at ICCT and ETAuto for hosting this wonderful discussion. We will have one more webinar coming shortly on a different topic. So please do keep look at our social media handles. Do subscribe to our email and newsletters to keep abreast of the discussion. So once again, thank you everyone for this fantastic conversation, and look forward to seeing everyone again. Thank you.
Thanks, Amitji, and thanks all the listeners also.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.
Thanks, Amanji.
Thank you.
Thank you.